My entire family applauded as my father handed the leather-bound archive portfolio to my younger sister. She was already gloating before her fingers even grazed the cover. Then the museum curator stepped to the microphone and completely dismantled her perfect moment. The event was a lavish gallery opening in downtown Seattle, supposedly celebrating Chloe's artistic debut. In reality, it was a hijacking. The real attraction, the only reason the room was packed with serious buyers and critics, was our late grandfather's unreleased photography collection. Decades of pristine, unseen historical moments. Black and white street scenes from the 60s, jazz musicians in cramped alleyways, protests, quiet moments of urban decay. My best childhood memories were spent in his cramped, chemical-smelling darkroom, watching those exact images come to life in the developing trays. And Chloe had spent the last 4 months bragging to every art dealer on the West Coast that the collection was hers to monetize, just waiting on the final probate clearance from the estate. I'm 33 now, and I've spent my whole life standing in the shadow of my sister's manufactured brilliance. When Chloe sold an amateur derivative acrylic painting to one of my dad's golf buddies, my parents hosted a catered dinner for 50 people. When I secured my master's degree in archival science and bought a townhouse on my own dime, there was absolute silence. That was just Sarah doing her boring, predictable thing. I gave up expecting their validation a decade ago. You cannot negotiate with irrational favoritism. Days prior to the opening, Chloe had texted me about her plans to turn our grandfather's life's work into a cheap commodity. Once Dad signs over the master rights on Friday, I am partnering with a huge apparel brand for graphic tees. She already treated it like a closed deal, fast fashion, slapping his carefully framed shots of civil rights marches onto $20 cotton shirts to be sold at mall kiosks. On the evening of September 14th, the gallery was packed. The air smelled of expensive eucalyptus candles and sharp white wine. Relatives stood around praising Chloe's visionary plans as if the ink was already dry. Nobody bothered to ask my opinion. At sunset, my father, Richard, wrapped his arm around Chloe in front of the main exhibit wall. My mother, Imogen, wiped away a theatrical tear for the benefit of the society photographer circling the room. I stood near the coat check, arms crossed, and watched the charade. My father reached toward a velvet-draped pedestal and lifted the master portfolio. It was just a prop, really, a beautiful leather binder meant to represent the transfer of power. He placed the heavy book into Chloe's outstretched hands. She tilted it upward, making direct eye contact with me across the room. Her smile was sharp, victorious. "Your mother and I know you will take this family's legacy to a global level," my father announced, his booming voice carrying easily over the jazz trio playing in the corner. The room erupted in polite, cultured applause. Smartphone cameras flashed continuously. Suddenly, a harsh microphone screech echoed across the room. People winced and covered their ears. The jazz trio stopped abruptly. Jack Vance, the museum's chief curator, stood near the entrance by the podium. He was not smiling. He adjusted his glasses and looked dead at my father. "Excuse me, Richard," Jack projected over the fading murmurs. "I am afraid we have a severe miscommunication." Jack opened a worn leather satchel at his side and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents, bound by a heavy wax seal. Written on the top in my grandfather's unmistakable, shaky cursive were the words, "To be executed upon public exhibition." For the past several months, there has been a profound misunderstanding regarding the legal ownership of the Harrison archive, Jack stated, his voice flat and authoritative. Chloe's triumphant smile faltered. She looked at Richard, confused. "The assumption that this collection belongs to the estate, or to Chloe, is entirely false," Jack continued. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. The art dealers and critics exchanged glances. The master negatives and all associated intellectual property rights were irrevocably transferred to an independent cultural trust 3 years prior to his passing, Jack said. That trust is strictly governed by a sole executor, chosen for her unwavering respect for the historical integrity of the work. Chloe panicked. Her voice cracked. "Fine, who is the executor?" Jack didn't answer her. He walked directly through the crowd. The guests parted for him like water. He stopped right in front of me, near the coat check. The air was sucked out of the room. Across the gallery, my father dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the polished concrete floor, the sound like a gunshot in the dead silence. "This is a joke," Chloe hissed, stepping off the small presentation platform. "Dad, tell him this is a joke. The federal copyright transfers were finalized and authenticated in 2023. Jack replied calmly, handing me the heavy stack of documents. I looked down. Federal registration numbers, trust mandates, absolute ironclad proof. My name was printed boldly on every single line. Sarah Harrison, sole executor, sole beneficiary of the Harrison Cultural Trust. My father took a step forward, his hands shaking. His face was flushing a deep, dangerous red. "Jack, there is some kind of mistake here. My father was not in his right mind 3 years ago. We have medical records. Your father drafted this himself, Richard," Jack said softly, turning to face him. "He passed a competency evaluation the morning he signed it. I was a witness. So was a federal judge." Jack turned back to the crowd, raised his voice slightly, and read from a smaller piece of paper he pulled from his pocket. The final paragraph of my grandfather's mandate. "Sarah has demonstrated a profound, quiet dedication to preserving history without ever seeking the spotlight. She understands the weight of these images. She will protect them." I felt a sudden, tight pressure in my throat. I remembered all those silent afternoons in the darkroom, the red safety light casting long shadows across my grandfather's wrinkled hands, the careful way he taught me to hold the delicate film by the edges so the oils from my skin wouldn't ruin the emulsion. He knew exactly what was going to happen after he died. He knew Richard and Chloe would try to strip mine his life for cash and clout. He was protecting his legacy from them, and he trusted me to hold the line. Chloe was still clutching the empty leather portfolio, her knuckles completely white. She looked at the meaningless prop in her hands, and then at the legal legal authority in mine. The silence dragged on for 10 unbearable seconds. Then, my father moved. He marched across the room, grabbed my upper arm in a tight grip, and hissed in my ear, "Office now." He didn't wait for a response, dragging me toward the gallery director's private office at the back of the building. Jack followed right behind us, his expression unreadable. My mother scurried after us, her heels clicking frantically on the concrete. Chloe stayed frozen on the floor, surrounded by confused investors and whispering critics. Richard shoved the office door closed the second Jack and Imogen were inside, locking it with a sharp click. The heavy oak door muffled the sound of the gallery outside. "What the hell is this, Sarah?" Richard demanded. The polished, charismatic father figure from 2 minutes ago was gone. He looked cornered. "What did you make him sign?" "I didn't make him sign anything," I said, pulling my arm out of his grip. It throbbed. "I'm seeing these documents for the first time right now, just like you." "Bullshit," Imogen snapped. She stepped around my father, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't doing the theatrical crying anymore. "You've always been jealous of your sister. You couldn't just let her have one night. You had to go behind our backs and manipulate a dying old man." "He wasn't dying 3 years ago, Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "He was perfectly healthy and he saw exactly who you people are." "This trust is invalid," Richard said to Jack, ignoring me entirely. "I am the executor of the primary estate. I have power of attorney. This is a clerical error." "Power of attorney expires upon death, Richard," Jack said smoothly, "and the trust exists outside the estate. You have no legal standing." "None. Chloe has already signed preliminary contracts," Richard growled, leaning over the director's desk. "Do you understand what you've done? She has a memo of understanding with a major retailer. We've accepted in advance." My stomach dropped slightly, but I kept my face blank. "You sold rights you didn't own. We assumed they were ours," Richard yelled, slamming his hand on the desk. "Because that is how normal families work, Sarah. The property goes to the children, and the children distribute it. He didn't trust you to distribute it. He knew you'd sell it to the highest bidder to fund Chloe's vanity projects." I held up the thick stack of papers. "This is done. The collection isn't being put on graphic tees. It's not being sliced up for mall kiosks." Imogen stepped closer, her voice dropping into that quiet, dangerous register she used when she wanted to cut deep. "You are destroying your sister's career out of spite. She has investors out there. Real people who put real money into this opening." Someone knocked hard on the office door. Richard froze. He looked at the door, then back at me. "Do not say a word," he whispered, pointing a finger at my face. He unlocked the door and pulled it open just a few inches. Standing in the hallway was a man I recognized from the VIP guest list, Caden Trask. He was an acquisitions director for a massive streetwear conglomerate out of Los Angeles. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He didn't look happy. "Richard," Caden said, pushing the door open fully and stepping into the office. He glanced at Jack, then at me, then back to my father. "I'm going to need some clarity on what the hell just happened out there." "Caden, it's a misunderstanding," Richard started, putting on his best country club smile. "A minor probate issue. My father had some outdated paperwork filed with the museum. We're clearing it up right now." "A minor probate issue," Caden repeated flatly, because from where I was standing, it looked like the museum curator just legally humiliated your daughter and proved you don't own the property you sold me. "We own it," Imogen insisted quickly. "It's a family dispute, Mr. Trask. Sarah is just, she's upset. We'll have her sign a proxy release by Monday morning." Caden looked at me. "Are you signing a release by Monday morning?" "No," I said. "I'm the sole executor. The collection isn't for sale." Caden stared at me for a long time. Then he turned to my father. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I wired $80,000 to Chloe's LLC yesterday morning as a good faith advance on the merchandising contract," Caden said. His voice was quiet, casual, which somehow made it worse. "She assured me she had the master rights. You co-signed that assurance, Richard." Richard swallowed hard. "Caden, listen, we have the funds. We can just—" "Chloe already spent $20,000 of it on this opening," Caden interrupted. "The catering, the PR firm, the venue rental. It all came out of my advance." Nobody said anything. Imogen looked pale. "You sold me a bridge you didn't own," Caden said, checking his watch. "I'm flying back to LA tonight. You have until Wednesday to refund the $80,000 in full, or my legal team will file a civil suit for corporate fraud against Chloe, against you, and against the estate." He didn't wait for a reply. He just turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door open behind him. The faint sound of the jazz trio drifting down the hallway felt mocking. Richard slowly turned to look at me. His jaw was tight. "Do you see what you've done? I didn't spend 20 grand of someone else's money on shrimp cocktails and a PR firm," I said, my grip tightening on the heavy wax-sealed envelope. "That was your golden child." "Sarah, please," Imogen said, her voice suddenly trembling. The anger was gone, replaced by calculated desperation. "We don't have $80,000 liquid right now. You know your father's business has been struggling. If this guy sues Chloe, it will ruin her. It will bankrupt us. Then she better start painting a lot of derivative acrylics to pay him back," I said. I turned to Jack. "I want to take possession of the physical negatives. Now, tonight." Jack nodded. "As executor, you have the right to secure the physical assets immediately." I looked at my parents. "Where are they?" Richard didn't say a word. He just stared at me, a slow, dark realization creeping into his eyes. Imogen's trembling stopped. The desperation vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hard smile. It was the fastest emotional pivot I had ever seen her make. "The rights belong to the trust," Imogen said smoothly. "But the physical property, the film canisters, the prints, the darkroom equipment, it's all still in our basement, Sarah." I stopped. "And as far as I'm concerned," Imogen continued, crossing her arms, "until a judge orders me to open my doors, my house is private property. You have the rights to publish them, but you don't have the film, and you are not coming into my home to get it." I stared at my mother. Her chin was tipped up, that familiar posture of absolute defiance she adopted adopted whenever a cashier wouldn't accept an expired coupon. Only now she was applying it to federal copyright law. You're talking about stealing trust property, Imogen, Jack said. His voice had lost its diplomatic museum curator polish. It was hard and flat. That is a felony. The cultural trust is a federally recognized entity. You are threatening to withhold assets belonging to it. I'm not withholding anything, Imogen said, her eyes never leaving mine. I'm simply stating that my home is my castle. We need time to review these so-called documents with our own attorney. Until then, everything stays exactly where it is, in my basement. It's Friday night, Jack, Richard added, catching on to his wife's strategy. The color was returning to his face. He adjusted his cuffs, trying to project authority again. Courts are closed. You can file whatever paperwork you want on Monday morning. But until a judge signs a warrant or an injunction, nobody is crossing my threshold. They were buying time. 3 days, 72 hours. My stomach clenched. The basement darkroom was meticulously climate controlled. My grandfather had spent thousands installing a specialized ventilation and humidity system to protect the delicate silver gelatin negatives, some of which were over 60 years old. If Richard and Imogen decided to move them, if they shoved those fragile canisters into cardboard boxes and dragged them up to the sweltering attic to hide them, or dumped them in the damp garage, decades of history would be destroyed by Monday. The office door clicked open. Chloe slipped inside, pushing the heavy oak shut behind her and leaning against it. She looked awful. The confident, radiant artist from 20 minutes ago was gone. Her expensive silk dress suddenly looked like a costume. Half the room is leaving, Chloe said. Her voice was hollow. The gallery director just told the caterers to stop passing hors d'oeuvres. They're shutting the bar down early. She looked at Richard. Dad, Caden's assistant just cornered me in the hallway. He wanted the routing number for the refund. Is it true? Are we actually being sued? We are handling it, sweetheart, Richard said, softening his voice entirely. It was the tone he used when she was 7 and scraped her knee. It's a minor legal hiccup. We have the weekend to sort it out. I don't have $80,000, Chloe whispered, her eyes welling up with real tears this time. I spent it. I bought the PR package. I paid for the influencer outreach. I signed a 6-month lease on a studio space in Capitol Hill yesterday. You did what? Imogen snapped, breaking her stare down with me to look at her daughter. Chloe, we talked about this. You were supposed to wait until the second advance cleared before signing a lease. I needed the space to process the merch orders. Chloe cried, her voice pitching up in panic. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She did this. She knew. You knew this whole time, Sarah, and you waited until tonight to humiliate me in front of the entire Seattle art scene. I didn't know anything until Jack handed me that envelope, I said. And even if I did, this isn't about you, Chloe. It's never been about you. Granddad made this decision 3 years ago. He had dementia. Chloe yelled. He had arthritis. I corrected coldly. His mind was sharper than yours on your best day. He just knew exactly what you'd do with his life's work. He knew you'd treat it like a winning lottery ticket. Chloe lunged forward, but Richard caught her arm, pulling her back. Stop it. Both of you, he barked. He looked at me, his jaw set. Here is what is going to happen, Sarah. You are going to go home. We are going to go home. We are going to let the dust settle on this disaster. Tomorrow morning, you will come over for breakfast, and we will sit down like a family and figure out a financial arrangement that works for everyone. There is no financial arrangement, Jack interjected. The trust mandates the collection be digitized and housed at the museum for public study. It strictly forbids commercial merchandising. I wasn't talking to you, Jack, Richard said softly. I was talking to my daughter, the one who is currently tearing her family apart. He looked at me, trying to leverage 33 years of ingrained parental authority. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. We'll have coffee. We'll talk about a buyout. You want to be the executor? Fine. You can execute a settlement that keeps your sister out of bankruptcy court. They still thought they could buy me off. They thought because I had always been the quiet one, the agreeable one who just kept my head down and did my homework while Chloe threw tantrums, that I would eventually fold to keep the peace. If you touch those negatives, I said, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a deep, simmering rage I hadn't realized I was carrying. If you move them out of that climate-controlled room, if you alter a single strip of film to hide them from me, I won't just sue you. I will have Jack press federal charges for the destruction of historical artifacts. Imogen smiled, a thin, patronizing line. We would never damage family property, Sarah. We love those photos just as much as you do. We'll see you tomorrow morning. She linked her arm through Richard's. He put his other hand on Chloe's shoulder, steering her toward the door. Chloe wouldn't look at me as they passed. She just stared at the floor, clutching her empty leather portfolio like a shield. When the door clicked shut behind them, the silence in the office was deafening. I slumped into one of the leather guest chairs, the heavy envelope of trust documents resting on my knees. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the manila envelope to steady them. Jack let out a long, slow breath. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Well, that was certainly one way to open an exhibition. They're going to hold the physical film hostage, I said, looking up at him. They know I have the rights, but they know I can't do anything with the archive if I don't have the original negatives. They want to force a settlement. Extort the trust to pay off Caden Trask. They can't extort the trust, Jack said, sitting on the edge of the director's desk. The charter is ironclad. Even if you wanted to authorize a payout to Chloe's LLC, the bylaws your grandfather set up wouldn't allow it. The money he left in the trust is strictly for preservation and museum storage. They don't care about the bylaws, Jack. They only care about the $80,000 Chloe owes an angry streetwear buyer. I rubbed my temples. A massive headache was building right behind my eyes. If I don't give them a way out by Monday, they'll destroy the film, or they'll lose it. Mom is petty enough to burn it all in the backyard fire pit just to make sure I can't have it. Jack looked alarmed. She wouldn't. You don't know Imogen. If she can't use it to elevate Chloe, it has no value to her. It's just old plastic. I stood up, pacing the short length of the office. The reality of the weekend was setting setting in. I had legal ownership on paper, but possession is 9/10 of the law. The house was in Richard's name. The locks were his. If I called the police, they'd call it a civil dispute and tell me to get a court order. I need a lawyer, I said. Tonight, I have the museum's legal counsel on retainer, Jack said, pulling out his phone. I can try calling him, but like your father said, no judge is going to sign a replevin order at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. We're stuck until Monday morning. I stopped pacing. An idea was forming. A risky, incredibly stressful idea, but possibly the only one that didn't involve waiting for Monday while my mother systematically ruined 60 years of photographic history. Who has the keys to the house? I asked. Jack looked confused. What? My parents' house. I gave my key back years ago when I bought my townhouse. I looked at Jack. Do they have a house sitter? A neighbor? Sarah, you cannot break into their house, Jack warned, his tone instantly shifting to protective caution. If you do that, you play right into their hands. They will have you arrested for trespassing, and it will muddy the entire legal standing of the trust. Do not do anything reckless. I'm not going to break in, I said. I know the law, but I also know my father. He's a creature of habit, and I know who he uses for everything. I pulled out my own phone. I scrolled past the missed calls from aunts and uncles who were probably standing in the gallery outside wondering what just happened. I found the number for Elias Thorne. Elias was my grandfather's old neighbor, but more importantly, he was a retired locksmith and the guy my father hired to install the security system on the house 10 years ago. Elias loved my grandfather. They used to sit on the porch and drink cheap beer while my grandfather complained about the digital age of photography. I hit dial. It rang 3 times. Hello? A gravelly voice answered. Elias, it's Sarah. Sarah Harrison. Sarah, my God, it's been a while. How are you, kid? I heard about the big fancy gallery thing tonight. Thought you'd be sipping champagne. There was a change of plans, I said, keeping my voice steady. Elias, I need to ask you a huge favor, and I need to know if you still have the override codes for my parents' security system. Jack waved his hands frantically, mouthing the word no. I turned my back to him. Elias went quiet on the other end of the line. Why are you asking about the override code, Sarah? Because Granddad left me the archive. All of it. He made me the executor of a trust. I know, Elias said simply. I blinked. You knew. I was the notary who stamped the paperwork 3 years ago, kid. Elias chuckled dryly. He brought Jack over to my dining room table to sign the damn things because he didn't want your father's lawyers catching wind of it. My chest tightened. The layers of my grandfather's careful planning were slowly revealing themselves. He had insulated this secret perfectly. Then you know why I'm calling, I said. My parents are holding the physical film hostage. They're trying to leverage it to pay off Chloe's debts. If I wait until Monday for a court order, they might move the negatives out of the climate-controlled darkroom. You know how fragile the old silver gelatin stock is. It'll be ruined. Elias sighed, a heavy, tired sound. Your father always was a stubborn ass. Thinks he owns the world. Elias, please, I just need to get in, box them properly, and get them to the museum vault. If they call the police, I'll deal with the trespassing charge. I just can't let them destroy his work. You don't need to break in, Sarah, Elias said slowly. And you don't need my override codes. Why not? Because your grandfather wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what Richard would do if he ever got backed into a corner. I heard the sound of a drawer opening on Elias's end of the line, paper shuffling. When we signed those trust papers, your grandfather also signed a lease agreement. A lease? He legally severed the basement darkroom from the rest of the property, Elias explained. He leased the basement space to the Cultural Trust for $1 a year, for a duration of 99 years. It's filed with the county. Legally, that room isn't your parents' property anymore. It belongs to the trust. It's your room. I stared at the wall, completely stunned. Jack was watching me, trying to read my expression. He subdivided his own house? I whispered. He did. And he gave me a spare key to the exterior bulkhead door that leads directly down there. Your parents don't even know that lock was changed. They haven't used the bulkhead in 20 years. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for an hour. Elias, you are a lifesaver. I'm at my house, he said. Come get the key. And Sarah, bring a truck. There's a lot of boxes. I hung up the phone and turned to Jack. We don't need a court order. We need a U-Haul. Jack stared at me for a long second, his museum director polish completely cracking as a slow, incredulous smile crept onto his face. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't tell me to sleep on it. He just pulled his car keys out of his pocket. There's a 24-hour truck rental place by SeaTac, he said. I'll drive. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a battered 15-foot box truck that smelled aggressively of cheap pine air freshener and stale cigarette smoke. Jack was behind the wheel, navigating the damp, winding roads of my parents' upscale Mercer Island neighborhood. The rain had just started to fall, a classic Seattle drizzle that slicked the pavement and blurred the streetlights. I held Elias's heavy brass key in my palm, my thumb rubbing over the worn ridges. The whole drive over, I kept expecting to feel guilty. I was driving a moving truck to my childhood home in the middle of the night to empty out my dead grandfather's belongings behind my parents' backs. It sounded like the setup for a family estrangement, but I just felt a cold, clear sense of purpose. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for my parents to give me permission to exist in their space. I had the legal right, I had the moral high ground, and most importantly, I had the key to the bulkhead door. We parked 2 streets over. I told Jack as we approached the neighborhood entrance, my dad is a notoriously light sleeper, and this truck sounds like a dying tractor. We'll have to carry the boxes up the side path, through the rhododendron bushes, and down the block. I brought the archival dolly from my trunk, Jack said, his eyes fixed on the dark road. We'll stack them. Standard museum protocol for emergency asset extraction. I've done this during a flood in the archive's basement once. We can move fast. He killed the headlights as we rolled onto a quiet cross street, parking the truck under the heavy branches of an old cedar tree. The engine rattled to a stop. We sat in the sudden quiet for a moment. You ready for this? Jack asked quietly. No, I said. Let's go. We grabbed a stack of flattened, acid-free archival boxes Jack had swiped from the museum's loading dock on our way out of the city, plus a couple of heavy-duty flashlights. The walk to my parents' house felt surreal. The neighborhood was dead silent, the massive houses sitting far back from the street behind manicured lawns and iron gates. We slipped down the side of my parents' property, hugging the tall hedge that separated their yard from the neighbors. The wet grass soaked through my shoes immediately. I guided Jack around the back patio, keeping a wide berth from the motion sensor floodlights my dad had installed near the deck. At the far corner of the house, hidden behind overgrown hydrangeas my mother always complained about but never actually pruned, were the rusted metal bulkhead doors. They looked exactly the same as they did when I was 10. Peeling dark green paint, covered in wet leaves and moss. My dad hated them. He thought they were an eyesore, a relic of the house's original 1950s construction. But my grandfather had absolutely forbidden him from paving over them. Now I knew why. I knelt in the wet dirt and scraped a layer of mud off the heavy padlock Elias had installed all those years ago. My hands were shaking again, but I forced myself to breathe. I slid the brass key into the lock. It stuck for a second, grinding against years of grit, and then, with a heavy, satisfying clack, it popped open. I pulled the lock free and grabbed the rusted handle of the right door. Jack grabbed the left. We hoisted them up together. The old hinges groaned, a sharp metallic squeal that sounded deafening in the quiet night, but no lights flipped on inside the house above us. We descended the concrete steps into the pitch black. At the bottom was a solid steel weather door. I checked the handle. Unlocked. Granddad never locked the inner door. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me instantly. It wasn't just damp basement air. It was the sharp, metallic tang of silver nitrate, the faint sourness of stop bath, the dusty, paper-dry scent of old film. It was the smell of my childhood. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the absolute darkness, and stepped inside. Jack followed, gently pulling the steel door shut behind us to muffle any noise we made. He found the wall switch and flicked it. The room hummed, and then bathed us in the dim blood-red glow of the darkroom safety lights. My breath caught in my throat. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The long stainless steel sink ran the length of the far wall, lined with plastic developing trays and heavy glass tongs. Above it, strung across the room on wire lines, were dozens of wooden clothespins. The heavy enlarger sat on a sturdy oak table in the center, looking like some kind of retro-futuristic microscope. And lining the walls, floor to ceiling, were the custom-built, climate-controlled steel cabinets where he stored the negatives. Good God, Jack whispered, walking past me. He wasn't looking at the equipment. He was looking at the cabinets. He really did build a vault down here. I told you, I said, stepping fully into the room. He didn't trust anyone else to handle it. Sarah, there are hundreds of canisters here, Jack said, running a hand over the cold steel of the nearest cabinet. This is going to take us hours to pack properly. Then we better start, I said, unfolding the first archival box. We fell into a rhythm. It was a strange, silent ballet in the red light. I opened the cabinets, carefully lifting out the heavy metal film canisters, checking the dates written on the side in my grandfather's neat block lettering, and passing them to Jack. He nested them into the boxes, separating them with acid-free tissue paper to prevent the metal from rubbing. 1963, March on Washington. 1964, Chicago protests. 1965, A-series just labeled Detroit factory lines. Every canister felt heavy in my hands, not just with physical weight, but with the sudden, crushing reality of what my parents had been planning to do. They were going to sell this. They were going to let a streetwear company cut up this history and slap it on hoodies to pay off a PR firm. The anger I had felt in the gallery office flared up again, hot and sharp, settling into my chest as a permanent fixture. We had filled 4 boxes and were starting on the 5th when I heard it. A dull, heavy thud from the ceiling directly above us, floorboards creaking. Jack froze, a canister hovering halfway into a box. He looked at me, his eyes wide in the red light. They're awake, he mouthed. I held up a hand, signaling him to stay completely still. I strained my ears, listening past the low hum of the darkroom's ventilation system. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps walking across the kitchen floor upstairs. My dad. He always paced when he was stressed, and he had a lot to be stressed about tonight. The footsteps moved toward the basement door. I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding back, followed by the squeak of the hinges. Sarah? My dad's voice echoed down the wooden stairs that led from the main house into the finished part of the basement. He wasn't yelling. He was just testing the waters. I didn't move a muscle. I prayed the heavy insulated walls of the darkroom would muffle any noise we had made. Imogen, I'm telling you I heard something. Richard's voice drifted down, slightly muffled now. It's just the house settling. Richard, go back to bed. We have to deal with the lawyers in the morning. My mother's voice answered, distant and tired. I'm going to check the darkroom, Richard said. My heart hammered against my ribs. The darkroom was technically locked from the outside. My grandfather had installed a heavy deadbolt on the door that led to the finished basement to keep Chloe out when she was a toddler, and he always kept it locked. I had the only key to that door too, sitting on Elias's ring in my pocket. But if Richard tried the handle and found it locked, would he just walk away? Or would he go get his tools? Heavy footsteps came down the wooden stairs. They crossed the carpeted floor of the media room, heading straight for us. Jack and I were trapped. The bulkhead door was 10 feet away, but opening it now would make a massive racket. We were boxed in. The doorknob to the darkroom rattled violently. Jack winced, slowly lowering the metal canister back into the archival box without making a sound. Damn it, Richard muttered through the heavy wood. The knob rattled again, harder this time. He was putting his weight into it. The door frame creaked. I held my breath. I pictured him standing out there in his expensive silk pajamas, furious and helpless, trying to force his way into a room he didn't legally own, in a house he thought he controlled completely. Then, something else happened. Something I didn't expect. Dad? It was Chloe's voice. It came from the finished basement, just a few feet away from where Richard was standing. She sounded thick and congested, like she had been crying for hours. Chloe, what are you doing down here in the dark? Richard asked. His voice shifted instantly from frustrated to concerned, the golden child privilege in action. I couldn't sleep, Chloe sniffled. I came down to look for the spare key to this room. Mom said they were in the junk drawer. Why do you need to get in there tonight, sweetheart? Because I need to fix this. Chloe's voice cracked, rising in pitch. Caden is going to sue me, Dad. He's going to ruin my entire life over 80 grand. If I can just get a few of the best negatives out of there, I can take them to him at his hotel tomorrow morning, as collateral, just to show him we still have the assets. If I have the physical film, he can't back out. I closed my eyes. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just going to hold the collection hostage to force a settlement. Chloe was actively planning to steal the assets and hand them over to a corporate buyer who had zero legal right to possess them, just to save her own skin. Chloe, you can't do that, Richard said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. If you hand over those negatives to Caden, and Sarah files an injunction on Monday, that's crossing state lines with contested property. That's federal. Then what are we supposed to do? Chloe yelled. I could hear the sheer panic in her voice. Sarah is going to take it all. She's going to put it in some stupid museum vault where it sits and gathers dust, and I'm going to go to jail for corporate fraud. Nobody is going to jail, Richard said firmly. Listen to me. Tomorrow morning, when Sarah comes over, I am going to make her an offer she cannot refuse. I'm going to offer her my shares in the commercial real estate firm. I opened my eyes and stared at the door. Jack looked at me, raising his eyebrows in the red light. Richard's real estate firm was his entire identity. It was worth millions. He was offering to trade his life's work to buy me out of my grandfather's legacy, just to protect Chloe from the consequences of her own arrogance. You'd do that? Chloe asked, her voice small. I will do whatever it takes to protect this family, Richard said. But you have to let me handle Sarah. She's angry right now. She feels slighted. We just have to let her throw her little tantrum, make her feel important for a day, and then we buy her out. By Monday, this will all be over. I felt a sudden, icy calm wash over me. The rage wasn't hot anymore. It was freezing cold. They didn't respect me. They didn't respect the art. They just viewed me as an obstacle to be managed, a tantrum to be humored, a price tag to be negotiated. Go back upstairs, Chloe, Richard said softly. Get some sleep. I'll call a locksmith in the morning to drill this door out before Sarah gets here. We'll secure the film before she even sits down for coffee. Footsteps retreated across the carpet. The wooden stairs creaked as they both walked back up to the main floor. The heavy door at the top of the stairs shut with a solid thud, and the deadbolt clicked into place. Silence returned to the basement. Jack exhaled a long, shaky breath and leaned against the stainless steel sink. Well, he whispered, that accelerates the timeline. Keep packing, I said, grabbing another box and unfolding it with sharp, precise movements. We're taking everything. The film, the contact sheets, the processing logs, everything. Sarah, they're going to drill the lock in the morning, Jack pointed out, his hands moving quickly now as he loaded canisters. When they walk in here and find the room completely empty, it's going to be nuclear. They will call the police. Let them, I said. The police will ask for proof of ownership. They'll show them a deed to a house, and I'll show them a federal trust mandate and a 99-year lease. Let Richard try to explain to the cops why he was drilling into a room he doesn't own. We worked in absolute silence for the next 2 hours. My arms ached, my lower back was screaming, but we didn't stop until every single cabinet was completely empty. We stacked 15 heavy archival boxes onto Jack's dolly. That's the last of the film, Jack whispered, wiping sweat from his forehead. He pointed to the oak table. What about the equipment? Leave it, I said. The trust mandate only covers the intellectual property and the physical media. The enlarger and the trays belong to the estate. I won't give them a single legal excuse to claim I took something that wasn't mine. We maneuvered the heavy dolly to the steel weather door. I cracked it open, checking the concrete stairwell. The rain had picked up, drumming heavily against the rusted metal bulkhead doors above us. It was a good thing. The sound of the rain would mask the noise of the dolly wheels on the concrete. I'll pull, you push, Jack said, grabbing the top handles of the dolly. We hauled the stack of boxes up the concrete steps, the wheels thumping rhythmically against the stone. The cold rain felt incredible against my hot face. We got the dolly out onto the wet grass, and I carefully lowered the bulkhead doors back into place, sliding the heavy padlock shut and snapping it locked. We dragged the dolly through the mud, back along the side of the house, terrified the whole time that the motion lights would click on. But the house remained dark and silent. By the time we got back to the U-Haul, we were both soaked to the bone and covered in mud. We loaded the boxes into the back of the truck, securing them with ratchet straps so they wouldn't slide around. Jack slammed the roll-up door down and locked it. I climbed into the passenger seat, my wet clothes sticking to the cheap vinyl. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was 3:15 a.m. Jack got in, shivering, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, loud and obnoxious in the quiet neighborhood. He threw it into drive and we rolled away from the curb, leaving my childhood home behind in the rearview mirror. So, Jack said, turning the heater on full blast. The museum vault requires 2 key cards to access. I have one. The night security supervisor has the other. We can have these locked up and logged into the secure system by 4:30 a.m. Good, I said, staring out the window at the blurry streetlights. And then what? Jack asked, glancing at me. Your dad expects you for coffee at 9. I looked down at my phone. I opened my text messages and found the thread with my dad. The last message he had sent me was 3 weeks ago, asking if I wanted him to pick up dry cleaning. I typed a new message. I won't be there for breakfast. The dark room is empty. The archives are secure. Have your lawyer call Jack on Monday. I hovered my thumb over the send button. Then, my phone vibrated in my hand. A new message popped up at the top of the screen. Not from my dad. Not from Chloe. It was from an unknown number. Miss Harrison, this is Caden Trask. We need to talk before your family makes a massive mistake. Meet me at the Four Seasons lobby at 8 a.m. Come alone. I stared at the glowing screen, the harsh blue light reflecting off the rain-streaked window of of the U-Haul. Jack shifted gears, the heavy transmission grinding as we merged onto I-5 North toward downtown. "Who is it?" Jack asked, keeping his eyes on the wet road. I held the phone out so he could see. He squinted at the text block, his brow furrowing. "Trask," Jack muttered. "How did he even get your number?" "My parents probably gave it to him," I said, dropping the phone back into my lap. "Or Chloe. They're trying to triangulate me. Send the angry corporate guy after the stubborn sister. Are you going to meet him?" "I have to," I said, leaning my head against the cold glass. "If I don't, he goes nuclear on my family on Monday. I don't care what happens to Chloe's fake career. But if Caden files a massive civil suit, it drags the trust into a protracted legal battle over ownership rights just to clear our name. I need the trust clean. I need Granddad's name clean." Jack nodded slowly. "We'll get the film secured first. Then you deal with Los Angeles." The museum loading dock was a cavernous concrete tunnel, lit by buzzing sodium lamps. It was 4:10 am when Jack pulled the truck up to the steel roll-up doors. A lone security guard, an older guy named Stellan with a thermos of coffee, came out to meet us. He didn't ask questions about the mud on my jeans or the exhausted look on Jack's face. He just swiped his keycard, and the heavy doors rumbled upward. It took us another hour to unload the 15 archival boxes, stack them on the heavy-duty freight elevator, and wheel them down into the sub-basement. The main vault was exactly what I had hoped for. A massive, climate-controlled room that smelled faintly of ozone and dry paper. It was a fortress of preservation. Stellan and Jack inserted their keycards simultaneously into the electronic panel on the wall. The heavy steel door clicked and hissed, swinging outward on massive hinges. We wheeled the dolly inside. I found an empty section of industrial shelving in the back corner and began transferring the boxes one by one. With every box, I slid onto the cold metal shelf. A fraction of the weight lifted off my chest. 1963, 1968, they were safe. Imogen couldn't burn them. Richard couldn't leverage them. Chloe couldn't print them on $50 mall shirts. When the last box was shelved, Jack closed the vault door. The locking mechanism engaged with a series of heavy, echoing thuds. It was 5:30 am. "Go home, Sarah," Jack said gently, leaning against the concrete wall of the corridor. He looked just as wrecked as I felt. "Shower, sleep for an hour. I'll stay here and start the cataloging paperwork so they are officially logged into the museum's custody system by the time the sun comes up." I drove my own car, parked at the gallery, back to my townhouse in Ballard. The sky was just beginning to turn a bruised, pale gray. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The adrenaline was still humming through my veins, sharp and electric. I stood under a scalding shower until the mud and the smell of the darkroom chemicals washed down the drain. I dried my hair, put on a sharp black blazer, a white silk shirt, and tailored trousers. I didn't want to look like the overlooked younger sister. I needed to look like the sole executor of a multi-million-dollar cultural asset. I arrived at the Four Seasons at 7:50 am. The lobby was a masterclass in quiet wealth, polished stone floors, soaring ceilings, the smell of fresh lilies and roasted espresso. At this hour, it was mostly empty, save for a few business travelers reading the Wall Street Journal on plush leather sofas. I spotted Caden Trask immediately. He was sitting at a corner table near the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Elliott Bay. He was wearing a dark, perfectly fitted suit without a tie, tapping on a sleek tablet with one hand and holding a ceramic coffee cup with the other. He looked rested, sharp, and utterly unbothered by the chaos he had witnessed the night before. I walked over and pulled out the chair across from him. He didn't jump. He just calmly set his tablet down, took a sip of his coffee, and looked at me. Up close, his eyes were a cold, calculating gray. "Miss Harrison," Caden said, his voice smooth and even. "Thank you for meeting me. Can I order you a coffee? They do a decent pour over here." "I'm fine," I said, folding my hands on the glass tabletop. "You said we needed to talk before my family makes a mistake. My family has already made several. Which one are we discussing?" Caden smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm smile. "You don't pull your punches. I respect that. Let's skip the corporate dance then. I don't want to sue your sister." I kept my face perfectly neutral. "Then don't." "It's not that simple," Caden said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "My company allocated a significant marketing budget for the Harrison Archive capsule collection. We have fabric sourced. We have retail space allocated. $80,000 was just the advance on the merchandising rights. The total contract value over the next 2 years was projected at just shy of $1.2 million. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. $1.2 million. No wonder Richard was ready to trade his real estate shares to buy me out. No wonder Chloe was having a breakdown in the basement. They hadn't just sold a few photos. They had mortgaged my grandfather's entire legacy for a massive corporate payout. The rights were never theirs to sell, I said, keeping my voice steady. The trust is ironclad. You have a very expensive piece of paper signed by people with no legal authority. I know, Caden said softly. My legal team spent the night pulling the county records on the Harrison Cultural Trust. Your curator friend wasn't bluffing. You hold all the cards. So why am I here, Mr. Trask? Because I want to buy the rights from you. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper, and slid it across the glass table toward me. I'm authorized to offer the trust a flat buyout of $500,000 for the exclusive commercial merchandising rights to the archive, Caden said. You keep the physical negatives. You can put them in the museum. We just get high-resolution scans and the legal clearance to use them for the apparel line. It's a clean deal. You fund your trust, I salvage my capsule collection, and I don't destroy your sister's life in civil court. I looked at the folded paper. I didn't touch it. The trust mandate strictly forbids commercial merchandising. I said, bylaws can be amended. Caden countered smoothly. You're the sole executor, a sympathetic judge, a good lawyer, a claim that the trust needs immediate liquid capital to ensure the long-term physical preservation of the assets. We can push it through. I have lawyers who do this every day. He was offering me $500,000 to do exactly what my sister was trying to do, just with better paperwork. No, I said. Caden didn't blink. 750,000. No, a million. Flat, paid directly into the trust account by Wednesday. I finally reached out and pushed the folded paper back across the table. My grandfather spent his life documenting history. He didn't do it so some teenager in Calabasas could wear a photo of a civil rights march on a hoodie while drinking an iced matcha. The answer is no. Not for a million. Not for 10. Caden stared at me for a long time. The faint, polite smile faded from his face entirely. He picked up the piece of paper, unfolded it, and looked at it as if he were disappointed in the ink. I thought you might say that, Caden murmured. Your father warned me you were stubborn. You spoke to my father? He called me at 6 o'clock this morning, Caden said, looking back up at me. He was frantic, babbling something about the dark room being completely empty. I felt a sharp spike of satisfaction, followed immediately by caution. Richard had found the empty cabinets. The bomb had gone off. He told me you stole the negatives. Caden continued, his tone conversational. He asked for an extension on the refund. Said he was filing a police report against you this morning for grand larceny. It's not grand larceny when you hold the lease to the room and the federal deed to the property inside it, I said flatly. I know that. You know that. But your father is a desperate man, Sarah. And desperate men do incredibly stupid things. Caden took a slow sip of his coffee. Do you know why he is so desperate to protect Chloe from this lawsuit? Because she's his favorite. She always has been. That's part of it, Caden said. But it's mostly because of the guarantee. I frowned. What guarantee? Caden set his cup down. Chloe's LLC didn't have the credit history to secure a $1.2 million projected contract. She's a 20-something artist with a couple of minor gallery sales. My company doesn't take on that kind of risk without collateral. The cold feeling in my chest started to spread outward, creeping down my arms. What did he do? Your father co-signed the master contract, Caden said quietly. He signed a personal liability guarantee, which means when Chloe inevitably defaults on the $80,000 advance and fails to deliver the master rights, my company isn't just suing her LLC. Caden leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. We are going to liquidate your father's commercial real estate firm. We are going to put a lien on his house on Mercer Island. We are going to take absolutely everything he owns to cover the breach of contract. I sat perfectly still. The ambient noise of the hotel lobby, the clinking of silver spoons against porcelain, the low murmur of wealthy guests, the soft jazz playing through the hidden ceiling speakers, seemed to drop away entirely. My father had bet his entire life on his golden child. He had taken 30 years of building a commercial real estate portfolio, his reputation, his pristine credit, and the roof over his wife's head. And he had pushed all the chips to the center of the table because Chloe wanted to sell t-shirts. He guaranteed it, I repeated, the words feeling heavy on my tongue, without having the actual copyright clearance. He assured us the copyright clearance was a formality, Caden said, leaning back in his chair. He provided a forged letter of intent from the estate lawyer, claiming the transfer was pending a standard 30-day probate delay. My legal department flagged it as a minor risk, but given your father's standing in the Seattle business community and his willingness to sign a personal liability waiver, they approved the advance. He committed fraud. Technically, yes, Caden agreed, completely unbothered. If we go to court, my company won't just win a civil judgment. We will likely forward the findings to the district attorney. Your father could face criminal charges for wire fraud. The $80,000 was wired across state lines. I looked out the window. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the gray waters of Elliott Bay. I thought about the sheer arrogance it took for Richard to sign that document. He was so incredibly confident that he could just steamroll whatever minor legal hurdles my grandfather had put in place, so certain that his will was the only one that mattered. You're telling me all this because you think it will make me sign that paper, I said, looking back at Caden. I'm telling you this because I am a pragmatist, Caden said. I don't care about your family drama, Sarah. I care about my supply chain. I have factories in Vietnam waiting on high-resolution image files to start printing fabric. I have marketing rollouts scheduled for November. If I have to sue your father, I will win, but it ties up my department in litigation for 2 years, and I lose my Q4 product launch. I'd rather pay you $1 million right now, get my files, and go back to Los Angeles. He tapped his index finger against the folded paper. You have until Monday at 9 a.m., Caden said, checking his heavy silver watch. If I don't have a signed transfer of rights in my inbox by the time the banks open, my lawyers file the suit. Chloe goes bankrupt. Your father loses his firm. Your mother loses the house. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with one hand. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He just gave me a curt nod. Enjoy the coffee, he said, and walked away toward the elevators. I sat there alone for 20 minutes. The waitress eventually came over and quietly cleared Caden's cup, leaving me staring at the folded piece of paper on the glass table. $1 million. A clean exit. It would save my parents from complete ruin. It would save Chloe from herself. All I had to do was violate my grandfather's dying wish and desecrate his life's work. I picked up the paper, tore it perfectly in half, then in quarters, and dropped the pieces into the empty sugar bowl. I left the hotel and drove straight back to the museum. The loading dock was closed, so I went through the main staff entrance. The museum wasn't open to the public yet, the vast echoing halls empty except for the occasional maintenance worker buffing the floors. I swiped my temporary guest pass and took the service elevator down to the archive's sub-basement. Jack was sitting at a metal desk outside the vault doors, surrounded by empty coffee cups. His glasses were pushed up on top of his head, and he was rubbing his eyes. A stack of intake forms sat neatly squared on the desk in front of him. They're logged, Jack said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. He didn't even look up when I walked out of the elevator. Every single canister. The trust is now the official custodian of record, and the physical assets are secured under museum protocol. Nobody can touch them without a court order, and even then, our legal department would fight it for years. I slumped into the metal folding chair opposite his desk. Caden Trask just just offered me $1 million for the merchandising rights. Jack finally looked up, his hand freezing over a manila folder. $1 million? He also told me why my dad is so desperate. Richard signed a personal liability guarantee on the contract. He put up his real estate firm and the Mercer Island house as collateral. Jack stared at me. The color drained from his face. He leveraged the house? Over some graphic tees? It was a $1.2 million contract, I said numbly. Chloe was going to be a millionaire. Richard was making sure his golden child got her crown. And he lied on the disclosure forms to get the advance. Jack let out a long, slow breath. He took off his glasses and set them on the desk. Sarah, you understand that even if you wanted to take Trask's offer to save them, you can't. The Attorney General oversees all cultural and charitable trusts in this state. If you authorize a commercial sale that directly violates the founding mandate of the trust, the state will step in, freeze the assets, remove you as executor, and you could face personal liability for breach of fiduciary duty. I know. There is no legal mechanism for you to bail them out using your grandfather's archive. It's impossible. I know, I repeated. I tore up the offer. Jack nodded slowly. Good. That was the only right choice. But Richard is going to lose his mind when he realizes he's trapped. I have to go home and face them, I said, standing up. My legs felt like lead. I had been awake for over 24 hours. I just wanted to make sure the film was safe before I did. It's safe, Jack promised, patting the stack of intake forms. Go home, lock your doors, turn off your phone and sleep. You don't have to talk to them today. But I knew I wouldn't get that luxury. I drove back to my townhouse in Ballard. It was a modest, narrow 3-story unit I had bought 3 years ago, a place my parents rarely visited because it didn't have a water view, and parking was difficult. As I turned onto my street, I saw it immediately. My father's silver Lexus SUV was parked illegally across my driveway, blocking the garage. I parked on the street a block away and walked toward my front door. The morning rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and humid. My mother and father were standing on my small concrete porch. Chloe wasn't with them. Richard looked terrible. The polished, commanding patriarch from the gallery was gone. His hair was disheveled, he was wearing the same slacks from the night before, and he had dark circles under his eyes. Imogen, however, looked exactly as she always did, sharp, put together, wearing a beige trench coat, her mouth set in a tight, furious line. They saw me walking up the sidewalk. Richard stepped off the porch to meet me. Sarah, he said. His voice was hoarse. Where is it? It's in a climate-controlled vault at the museum, I said, stopping at the edge of my small front yard. I kept my distance. It's been logged into their custody system. You can't get to it. You broke into my house, Richard said, his hands clenching at his sides. I used a key to a door I legally have a right to open, to retrieve property I legally own. I corrected. I didn't take a single thing that belonged to you. You stole your sister's future, Imogen snapped, stepping up next to my father. We went down there this morning. It's completely empty. You are a vindictive, jealous little girl, and you have finally gone too far. Mom, stop, Richard said, holding up a hand to silence her. He looked at me, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw actual fear in his eyes. Sarah, please. I spoke to Caden Trask this morning. I know he met with you. He did. Then you know what he's threatening to do. I know what you did, I said, my voice hardening. You forged a letter of intent. You committed wire fraud. You bet the house and the business on a contract you had no legal right to sign. Richard flinched. He looked down at the wet concrete. I was trying to help her get established. The art world is impossible to break into without capital. I thought your grandfather was just being difficult. I thought I could clear the probate hurdle after the fact. I never thought he went behind my back and created a secret trust. He didn't go behind your back, I said. He protected his work from you because he knew you would sell it off for parts. Sarah, I am begging you, Richard said, looking back up. His voice cracked. If you don't sign over those rights to Trask, I lose the firm. The firm I built for 30 years. Your mother and I will have to declare bankruptcy. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. I can't sign over the rights, I said simply, even if I wanted to. The trust mandate forbids commercial merchandising. If I authorize the sale, the state attorney general will freeze the trust and charge me with a breach of fiduciary duty. I would go to jail to save you. Richard stared at me. He hadn't considered that. He was so used to manipulating the rules of business that he genuinely didn't understand the ironclad nature of a federal cultural trust. Then amend the mandate, Imogen demanded coldly. Hire a lawyer and dissolve the trust. I won't do that. You will do it, or you will have no family left, Imogen hissed. I don't have a family now, Mom, I said, staring right back at her. I have 2 people who only acknowledge I exist when they need me to fix a mess they made for their favorite daughter. Imogen's eyes narrowed into slits. She reached into the pocket of her trench coat and pulled out a sleek silver smartphone. Your father might be begging, Sarah, but I am not, Imogen said. Her voice was pure ice. You think you're untouchable because you have some paperwork Jack Vance drew up, but paperwork can be contested. Mom, don't, Richard warned quietly. Don't do this. Shut up, Richard, Imogen snapped, never taking her eyes off me. If you don't call Trask right now and accept his buyout, we are filing an emergency injunction on Monday morning to contest the validity of the trust. We are suing the estate. You have no grounds, I said. Elias was the notary. A federal judge signed off on it. Granddad passed a competency evaluation that morning. Competency evaluations can be challenged, Imogen said smoothly, especially when we have a sworn medical affidavit from Dr. Dotter Farrow stating that your grandfather was experiencing severe cognitive decline and memory loss in the months leading up to his death. My blood ran cold. Dr. Arthur Farrow was my grandfather's general practitioner, but he was also my dad's regular golf partner at the country club. He was a sleazy, accommodating doctor who frequently wrote my mother prescriptions for Valium whenever she claimed she was stressed. Dr. Farrow wasn't even at the signing, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the sudden spike of panic in my chest. Jack Vance was. Jack Vance is an art curator with a vested interest interest in securing a multi-million-dollar collection for his museum, Imogen countered, stepping closer. Dr. Farrow is a respected medical professional who has known our family for 40 years. If he signs an affidavit saying your grandfather was suffering from dementia and you coerced him into signing that trust document by isolating him in that basement, she let the threat hang in the damp morning air. That is perjury, I said. You're threatening to have a doctor commit perjury. I'm securing my family's assets, Imogen corrected. If we file that suit, the trust is frozen. The physical assets get locked in probate purgatory. You won't be able to exhibit them, you won't be able to publish them, and Jack Vance won't be able to legally house them. The museum's board of directors will force him to return the collection to the estate until the lawsuit is settled, and a lawsuit like that will take 5 to 7 years. She was right. If they cast enough doubt on my grandfather's mental state, the state would freeze everything. The museum wouldn't risk the liability of holding contested property. They would force Jack to hand the boxes back to the executor of the primary estate, which was Richard. And once they are back in our possession, Imogen said, a vicious, triumphant smile spreading across her face, I will take every single one of those film canisters out to the patio fire pit and burn them. And then I will tell the judge there was a tragic accident. I stared at the woman standing on my porch, my mother, the woman who used to braid my hair before school, who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had held my hand when I got my childhood vaccinations. She was looking at me with the cold, dead eyes of a cornered animal. She wasn't just threatening to destroy my grandfather's legacy anymore. She was threatening to burn it to ash out of pure, spiteful vengeance, just to make sure I couldn't have a victory. You're insane, I said. My voice didn't shake. I felt remarkably, terrifyingly calm. You would burn 60 years of history just to protect a forged contract. It's not history, Sarah, Imogen said, stepping so close I could smell her expensive Chanel perfume mixed with the damp morning air. It's leverage. And right now, you are the only thing standing between your family and the street. I will do whatever it takes to remove you from the equation. Imogen, enough, Richard pleaded, grabbing her arm. He looked physically ill. The reality of what he had done with Caden Trask was clearly crushing him, but he was still too weak to stop his wife from taking the wheel. We are filing the injunction on Monday morning, Imogen said, yanking her arm out of his grip. She shoved her phone back into her trench coat pocket. We will drag this out until the museum drops you out of pure exhaustion. Enjoy your weekend, Sarah. It's the last time you'll have control over anything in this family. She turned on her heel and marched back down the wet sidewalk toward the silver Lexus parked across my driveway. Richard lingered for a second. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg one last time, but he didn't. He just let out a ragged breath, turned, and followed his wife. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away. When the car turned the corner and disappeared, the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright for the last 24 hours finally evaporated. My knees buckled. I had to grab the wooden porch railing to keep from collapsing onto the concrete. My chest heaved, pulling in jagged, unsteady breaths. They were going to contest the trust. They were going to use Dr. Farrow to commit medical perjury and claim my grandfather had dementia. I unlocked my front door, stumbled inside, and locked the deadbolt behind me. I leaned my back against the heavy wood and slid down to the floor. The house was completely silent. My cat, a fat orange tabby named Barnaby, padded out from the kitchen and rubbed his face against my knee, purring loudly. I reached out and buried my fingers in his fur, trying to ground myself. I needed a lawyer, a ruthless, expensive probate lawyer who wasn't intimidated by Richard's money or Imogen's country club connections, and I needed one today. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and called Jack. He picked up on the second ring. Tell me you're asleep. They were waiting for me at my house, I said, my voice hoarse. Jack went completely silent on the other end of the line. The background noise of the museum shuffled slightly as he moved to a quieter room. What happened? Are you safe? Did they try to force their way in? No, they didn't have to. They brought a nuclear option. I took a deep breath, resting my head against the front door. Mom said they're filing an emergency injunction on Monday to freeze the trust. They're going to sue the estate to invalidate the mandate, claiming Granddad wasn't of sound mind when he signed it. Sarah, we have the notary. We have my testimony. We have the federal judge. They have Dr. Farrow, I said, my dad's golf buddy. Mom said he's prepared to sign a sworn medical affidavit stating Granddad was suffering from severe cognitive decline and memory loss in the months before he signed the papers. She's going to claim I isolated him and coerced him. Jack swore under his breath. It was a sharp, ugly word that sounded completely out of place coming from the polished museum curator. If they file that affidavit, it creates a legitimate title dispute, Jack said, his voice tight with anxiety. The state attorney general's office takes allegations of elder abuse and trust manipulation incredibly seriously. They will freeze the assets immediately pending an investigation. And the museum? I asked, already knowing the answer. The board of directors is notoriously risk-averse, Jack admitted quietly. If a judge orders the collection returned to the primary estate during the litigation, the board will comply. They won't risk the museum's reputation or face contempt charges for holding contested property. We will have to hand the boxes over to Richard. Imogen told me if they get the boxes back, she's going to burn them in the backyard fire pit and claim it was an accident. The line went dead quiet. Even Barnaby stopped purring, sensing the sudden shift in the room's energy. Okay, Jack said finally. His voice was completely different now. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. Then, we don't let them file the injunction. Or, if they do, we crush it before a judge even looks at it. You need representation, not museum counsel. You need your own bulldog. I don't have bulldog money, Jack. I have archival science degree money. I know a woman, Jack said. Her name is Tess Locke. She specializes in high net worth estate litigation and contested trusts. She represented a donor of ours a few years ago when his awful children tried to invalidate his cherished charitable bequests. She is vicious, she is brilliant, and she hates bullies. I'm texting you her cell number right now. Tell her I sent you, and tell her it's an emergency. My phone buzzed against my ear. A contact card popped up on the screen. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, Jack said. Call her. And Sarah, do not answer any calls from unknown numbers this weekend. If Trask's legal department starts digging, they might try to reach out to you directly to force a settlement before Monday. You only speak through Tess now. I hung up, pulled up Tess Locke's number, and hit dial. It rang 4 times. I was just about to leave a frantic voicemail when a woman answered. Her voice was sharp, slightly raspy, and completely awake for a Saturday morning. Locke, miss. Locke, my name is Sarah Harrison. Jack Vance told me to call you. Jack Vance owes me a bottle of incredibly expensive scotch, Tess said smoothly. I heard the sound of papers shuffling in the background, followed by the clink of a coffee mug. If he gave you my personal cell on a weekend, you are either in jail or someone is trying to steal a very large amount of money from you. Which one is it? Someone is trying to steal a cultural trust, I said, and they're threatening to use a fraudulent medical affidavit to invalidate my grandfather's state of mind. Tess stopped shuffling papers. Who is threatening this? The executor of the primary estate, I said, my chest tightening. My parents. Give me the short version, Tess ordered. No emotions, no family history, just the timeline and the assets. I gave it to her. I told her about the gallery opening, the secret trust, Caden Trask's $1.2 million contract, Richard's fraudulent personal guarantee, the empty darkroom, and Imogen's threat regarding Dr. Farrow. I kept my voice flat and clinical, just like she asked. When I finished, Tess let out a low whistle. Your father signed a corporate liability guarantee using forged probate documents to secure an $80,000 advance? Tess asked, confirming the details. He actually put his signature on that paper? Yes, Trask told me to my face. Well, your father is an idiot of monumental proportions, Tess said bluntly. Wire fraud across state lines. If Trask's company files a civil suit, the discovery phase alone will bankrupt his real estate firm. But that's his problem, not ours. Our problem is Dr. Farrow. Can they actually use a fake medical affidavit to freeze the trust? Absolutely, Tess said. In fact, it's the standard playbook for greedy heirs trying to break a trust. The legal threshold for sound mind is relatively low, but if they have a licensed physician swearing under oath that your grandfather lacked capacity, a judge will almost certainly grant a temporary injunction to freeze the assets while it goes to trial. If it goes to trial, the museum will give the negatives back to my parents, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to control it. My mother will destroy them. She promised me she would. Then we have to make sure Dr. Farrow never signs that affidavit, Tess said. I heard the tapping of a keyboard. Dr. Arthur Farrow, general practitioner, Mercer Island Clinic. Let me guess. Country club member? Golfs with your dad? Every Sunday. Classic. Tess muttered. Look, doctors like Farrow are pragmatic creatures. They write loose prescriptions and do favors for rich friends because it's comfortable and low risk. Perjury, however, is very high risk. Farrow is assuming this will be a quiet little family dispute handled behind closed doors. He's assuming you'll just roll over and accept his medical authority. I'm not rolling over. Good, because we are going to make him incredibly uncomfortable, Tess said. Her voice held a dangerous edge of amusement. I want you at my office on Monday morning at 7 a.m. Sharp. I'm going to draft a letter of preservation directed at Dr. Farrow's clinic. We are going to demand all medical records, intake logs, prescription histories, and billing statements for your grandfather for the last 10 years. We are going to explicitly cite an impending investigation into medical fraud and ethical violations regarding his relationship with your father. I blinked, stunned by the aggression. Will that work? A doctor willing to commit perjury for a golf buddy usually has other skeletons in his filing cabinet, Tess said. The moment Farrow realizes we are going to drag his entire medical practice into the light during discovery, his loyalty to your father will evaporate. He won't risk his medical license for Richard's real estate firm. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Okay, Monday at 7. Where is your office? Tess gave me an address in downtown Seattle, right near the federal courthouse. Get some sleep, Sarah, and whatever you do, do not contact your parents. Do not reply to their texts. If they show up at your house again, call the police and report a trespass. We are at war now. Act like it. She hung up before I could say thank you again. I set the phone on the floor and stared at the wall. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, but my mind was racing. I had a lawyer. I had a plan. But I also knew my parents better than anyone. Richard might crumble under the threat of a wire fraud investigation, but Imogen wouldn't. Imogen didn't care about the real estate firm. She only cared about Chloe's status. If she realized Farrow was backing out of the affidavit, she wouldn't just surrender. She would look for a new angle. She would look for a weak point. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the hardwood floor. I jumped, my heart hammering in my chest. Jack had told me not to answer unknown numbers. Tess had told me not to answer my parents. I leaned over and looked at the screen. It wasn't an unknown number, and it wasn't my parents. It was Elias, the retired locksmith who had notarized the trust, the man who had given me the key to the bulkhead doors. I picked up the phone. Elias? Sarah, Elias said. His gravelly voice sounded thin and strained. He was breathing heavily, as if he had just walked up a flight of stairs. I'm sorry to call you so early. I know you've had a hell of a night. It's okay. Are you all right? You sound out of breath. I'm fine, he said quickly, though he didn't sound fine at all. Listen to me carefully, kid. I just had a visitor at my house. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. A visitor? Who? Your sister, Elias said. Chloe was just here. She showed up on my porch crying, Elias said, his voice thick with disgust. Offered me $10,000. Said it was the last of her advance money. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper saying your granddad was confused the day he signed the trust. Claimed he didn't know what he was doing. She wanted me to say I just stamped it to humor an old man. I closed my eyes. What did you tell her? I told her to get off my property before I turned the garden hose on her. Elias grunted. She drove off in a panic. But that's not why I'm calling, Sarah. Her little visit reminded me of something. Something I should have remembered the second you called me last night. I sat up straight, Barnaby jumping off my lap in protest. What is it? Your granddad was a photographer. Sarah, a documentarian. He didn't just leave things to chance. And he certainly didn't trust Richard's country club buddies. I could hear Elias moving around his house. The sound of a heavy drawer sliding open. He gave me a sealed manila envelope the day we signed the trust. He told me to put it in my fire safe and forget about it. He said, if Richard ever tries to drag my mind through the mud, give this to Sarah. Come over here and get it. I didn't even bother brushing my hair. I grabbed my keys, locked the door, and drove the 20 minutes to Elias's modest ranch house in Bellevue. He was waiting on the front porch with a mug of coffee and a thick, yellow padded envelope. He handed it to me the second I stepped onto the concrete. It was heavy. My grandfather's handwriting was splashed across the front in thick black Sharpie for Sarah, in case of fire. Open it, Elias said softly. I tore the reinforced tape off the top. Inside, nestled in a layer of bubble wrap, was a small black external hard drive and a single sheet of lined notebook paper. I unfolded the paper. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means your father is trying to steal the house back, and he's probably using Artie Farrow to do it. Artie is a hack who prescribes beta blockers for golf swings. I never trusted him. A photographer's job is to capture the truth, so I made sure I did. I looked up at Elias. Do you have a laptop? We sat at his small kitchen table. I plugged the hard drive into the side of his old MacBook. A single video file popped up on the screen, dated 3 years ago, the exact morning the trust was finalized. I clicked play. The screen flickered to life. It was my grandfather. He was sitting at the oak table in the basement darkroom, bathed in the normal overhead light. He looked sharp, his eyes bright and alert behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing his favorite worn-out cardigan. On the table in front of him was the stack of trust documents, Elias's notary stamp, and a copy of the Seattle Times, clearly displaying the date. My name is Arthur Harrison, my grandfather said, his voice strong and clear through the laptop speakers. I am 81 years old. I am sitting in my home, and I am recording this of my own free will, without coercion. He leaned forward, looking directly into the camera lens. It felt like he was staring right at me. I am establishing the Harrison Cultural Trust today. I am naming my granddaughter, Sarah Harrison, as the sole executor. I am doing this because my son, Richard, is a man who values price tags over provenance. I know that when I am gone, he will attempt to liquidate my life's work to fund his own ego, or the ego of my youngest granddaughter, Chloe. I felt a lump form in my throat. He saw them so clearly. He always had. If this video is being played in a courtroom, it is likely because Richard has procured a fraudulent medical affidavit claiming I am not of sound mind. My grandfather continued, a dry, knowing smile touching the corners of his mouth. He is likely using Dr. Arthur Farrow to do it. Let the record show that I fired Dr. Farrow as my primary care physician 2 weeks ago because he suggested I invest in Richard's commercial real estate fund during a prostate exam. Elias let out a loud, barking laugh from the other side of the kitchen table. I subsequently visited an independent neurologist at Virginia Mason Medical Center, my grandfather said. He lifted a thick, stapled medical file into the frame. This is a comprehensive, 60-page cognitive and psychological evaluation. I scored in the 99th percentile for a man my age. I am entirely lucid. I know exactly what I am doing. I am protecting my legacy from thieves, and I am trusting Sarah to hold the line. He set the file down, picked up a pen, and signed the first page of the trust. The video ended. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, staring at the black screen. My chest felt incredibly light, as if a physical weight had just been severed from my ribs. He hadn't just left me a legal defense. He had left me an absolute guillotine. I'll be damned, Elias whispered. He played them perfectly. Can I keep this? I asked, pulling the hard drive free. It's yours, kid. Go finish this. On Monday morning at 6:55 a.m., I walked into the sleek glass-walled offices of Locke & Associates in downtown Seattle. Tess Locke was waiting for me in a corner conference room overlooking the Puget Sound. She was a striking woman in her 50s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her silver hair pulled back into a severe knot. She had a cup of black coffee in one hand and a legal pad in the other. You're early. Good, Tess said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I have the preservation letters drafted for Dr. Farrow's clinic. I also drafted a preliminary notice of intent to the medical board, just to make sure he understands exactly how hot the fire is going to get. I sat down and set the black hard drive on the polished mahogany table. You won't need the medical board, I said. Tess raised an eyebrow. Oh, my grandfather left a contingency plan, I explained, sliding the drive across the table. A video deposition, recorded the morning the trust was signed. He holds up the daily paper. He explicitly names Richard and Dr. Farrow, outlines their exact strategy, and provides on-camera proof of a past cognitive evaluation from an independent, board-certified neurologist at Virginia Mason. Tess stared at the small black rectangle for a long moment. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was the smile of an apex predator who had just been handed a wounded gazelle. She opened her laptop, plugged the drive in, and watched the video in complete silence. When my grandfather dropped the line about the prostate exam in the real estate pitch, Tess actually chuckled, a low, raspy sound of pure appreciation. When the video ended, she closed her laptop with a sharp snap. Sarah, Tess said, looking at me with genuine respect. Your grandfather was a gangster. He just hated being managed, I said. Here is what we are going to do, Tess said, pulling her keyboard toward her. I am not going to file a preservation letter. I am going to send a single, informal email to the attorney currently representing your father's estate. I am going to attach this video file. I am going to CC Dr. Arthur Farrow directly, and I am going to give them exactly 2 hours to withdraw any and all threats of litigation regarding the Harrison Cultural Trust. trust. And if they don't, they will, Tess promised. Doctor, Pharaoh is going to watch this video, realize your grandfather has a Virginia Mason neurologist on record, and he is going to realize that committing perjury against this level of documentation will result in the immediate revocation of his medical license and potential federal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. He will ghost your father by 9 a.m. She typed furiously for 3 minutes, attached the file, and hit send. Now, Tess said, leaning back and taking a sip of her coffee. We didn't have to wait 2 hours. At 8:14 a.m. my phone rang. It was Richard. I looked at Tess. She nodded. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the mahogany table. Hello, I said. Sarah, Richard said. His voice was completely hollowed out. There was no authority left, no anger, just the empty, echoing sound of a man who had finally hit the bottom of the well. Pharaoh just called me. He said he's pulling his affidavit. He said he won't testify. He told my lawyer to never contact his clinic again. I know, I said. He saw the video. You had a video this whole time? Imogen's voice crackled over the line. She was on speaker too. She sounded frantic. The icy composure finally shattered. You let us panic all weekend when you had a video? I found it yesterday, I said coldly. But even if I had it Friday night, it wouldn't have changed anything, Mom. You were the ones who decided to forge documents. You were the ones who decided to threaten perjury. Sarah, please, Richard begged. I could hear a strange, wet hitch in his breath. My father was crying. Trask's legal team just sent the formal demand letter. They gave us until noon to refund the advance. Or they file the suit and trigger the personal liability clause. I don't have the $80,000, Sarah. The firm's accounts are over-leveraged. If they trigger the clause, the bank is going to call in the commercial loans. We will lose everything. Then you should have read the contract before you signed it, Richard. You can't do this to us. Imogen screamed into the phone. We are your family. You are going to let a corporate buyer take our home? You're going to let Chloe go to jail? Chloe isn't going to jail, Tess interjected smoothly, leaning toward the phone. Civil fraud rarely results in criminal charges for the LLC holder, unless they try to hide assets, which I strongly advise against. She will, however, be bankrupt, as will you. Who is that? Who is on the phone? Imogen demanded. That is my attorney, I said, and she is the only person you will speak to regarding the archive from now on. Do not come to my house again. Do not call my phone again. The trust is sealed. The collection is in the museum. We are done. Sarah, wait, Richard started. I tapped the red button. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. The silence in the conference room was beautiful. I looked out the window at the Puget Sound, watching the ferries cut through the dark blue water. The fallout was swift and absolute. By Wednesday, Caden Trask's company filed the civil suit for breach of contract and corporate fraud. Without the cultural trust assets to leverage, Richard had no defense. The discovery phase revealed exactly what Tess had predicted. Richard had been floating bad debt in his real estate firm for years, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. Trask's lawyers triggered the personal liability guarantee and dismantled him. The commercial real estate firm was liquidated by the end of the year. Imogen fought bitterly to keep the Mercer Island house, but the bank put a lien on it. They were forced to sell it at a massive loss just to cover the legal fees and settle the remaining debt to Trask's company. They moved into a rented 2-bedroom apartment in Tacoma. Imogen stopped going to the country club. Chloe's Capitol Hill studio lease was broken. Her LLC was dissolved. The PR firm dropped her when her check started bouncing. The last I heard, she was working as a shift manager at a high-end coffee shop in Bellevue, telling anyone who would listen about how the Seattle art scene was rigged against true visionaries. I never spoke to them again. 14 months later, on a crisp Tuesday evening in November, I stood in the main exhibition hall of the museum. The room was dimly lit, the walls painted a deep matte charcoal. Spotlights illuminated 75 perfectly framed, pristine silver gelatin prints. There was no jazz trio. There were no caterers passing expensive shrimp cocktails. There were no fast fashion buyers looking for the next graphic tee. It was just the art. People walked through the gallery in quiet, reverent silence. They stood in front of the 1963 March on Washington photos, studying the expressions on the faces of the crowd. They lingered on the Detroit factory lines. They pointed out the incredible depth of field, the stark contrast of the shadows, the brutal, honest humanity captured in every single frame. I stood in the center of the room, holding a simple glass of sparkling water. Jack Vance walked up beside me, his hands in his pockets. He was smiling. The reviews in the Times tomorrow are going to be spectacular, Jack said quietly. The critics are calling it the most significant archival discovery of the decade. The Smithsonian has already requested a traveling exhibition for next spring. He would have hated the attention, I smiled, taking a sip of my water. He would have hated the critics, Jack corrected, but he would have loved the fact that the work survived. You did exactly what he asked you to do, Sarah. You protected it. I looked across the room at a large, blown-up print of a jazz musician playing a saxophone in a cramped, smoky alleyway in Chicago. The detail was so sharp I could almost smell the cigarette smoke and the brass. It wasn't a commodity anymore. It wasn't leverage. It was history, preserved perfectly behind museum glass, exactly where it belonged. Yeah, I said softly, watching the crowd absorb my grandfather's life. I did.